We're just about to start again, but before we start, I'd like to send a big thank you out to IEEE, the Computational Intelligence faction, and also the SSIT. Now, they've supplied the finances for all the food and the pizzas, the lollies, the drinks and everything. So put your hands together for IEEE for doing that. Thanks. And we've got Slade Beard. He's just about to give his presentation, so I'll leave it to him.
Okay, and I hope, can everyone up the back hear me if I walk around? Good? Yep. I hate
we need it for the recording.
Oh.
I'm so sorry about that, but I need to stay in sort of desk area for the recording, otherwise I don't pick it up at all.
All right. Well, I'll try to remember that and set myself some parameters to wander. I'm a bit of a wanderer when I talk, so my apologies for that if it goes in and out. First of all, just to mention what SSIT is all about. Within the IEEE, social implications of technology is becoming an increasingly large focus. As engineers, we do things all the time and have a long history of doing things that actually impact society in all sorts of ways that are unexpected. Now, I was actually making a point to Adam. As I was setting up for these slides today, I noticed an interesting adaptation of the IEEE logo. I don't know if you can actually see it, but underneath there is Advancing Technology for Humanity. Now, I think that's actually a bit of a bellwether for what's happening to the field of engineering. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Because the issues of singularity are very much issues where the technical developments that we are doing are having social impacts. But that also is not new, and I'll just go back and look at some of those things. So, here we are. We're an assemblage of Homo sapiens sapiens, the most successful enterprise that has actually operated on this planet. Really cool to be a part of it. So far, in spite of all the doomsayers along the way, we've actually done a pretty good job. I am actually very positive about our future. We have a lot of people out there saying that climate change is going to destroy the species, or some great levelling disease is going to come out of Africa. Some of my work with the World Health Organization, actually there are some great pessimists in that organisation about some of the things that are going to actually happen to the human species as a result of disease vectors, for example. I'm actually really optimistic about our future. Singularity is one of those events that is downstream from now, and I actually don't intend to talk about singularity today, except to say that I believe there's a certain sense of inevitability about two things. One, that we will increasingly enhance the capability of this soft system called the human body by the application of hard system technologies. Secondly, I have the same sense of inevitability about that as I do about the fact that our future actually lies beyond the atmosphere of this planet. We have a lot of issues to get through to get there, but we will do it because as humans, as Homo sapiens sapiens, we have this great capability to solve problems when they come up. So, we have all these climate change pessimists out there. I must confess, for a time I was one. But as I thought about what we do as humans, I realised that actually, once we accept there's a problem, we find ways to solve it, and we always have. That's why we're a successful species. That's why, actually, up here on my introductory slide, you can see a few examples of a few things. If you walk into our home out at Ascot Vale, one of the first things that confronts you as you walk through the front door is Lucy and this lower gentleman actually confronting you, looking back at you from the entry. We as hominids, have had this fascinating journey from, that's Lucy at the top, Australopithecus afarensis. Talk a little bit about Lucy later on in my presentation, because she actually teaches us some interesting lessons. As does this young man down here, the Cro-Magnon, as it's called, the first modern humans. They dealt with this issue called climate change, but we'll come back to that. So, I'm an engineer, as I said, but I also have a passion for human philosophy, for human performance, and for human capability development, and for our ability to actually be able to evolve over time and to, with us, evolve our technologies and the things that we do and the tools that we apply. So, what I'd like to do is actually share some of my thoughts and aspirations on that human journey. Throughout our history, there have been events that have changed the game. Singularity is one of those game-changing events that's out in the future. But there's been a lot of them. There's nothing new about these events. My own studies have been such that I am a UNSW PhD student actually looking at the intersect between engineering, philosophy, human performance and human decision making, and the design of the built environment, which runs me into the architects, some of whom dislike some of my work. Tell an architect that in fact the primary reason for modern building design is actually to provide a shell in which information systems exist, and they're going to get their nose out of joint really, really quickly. I in particular do a lot of work with emergency services, with police, fire, ambulance, and in those intense decision-making environments, stockbroking, etc. In all of those environments, there is a linkage between the built envelope of a building and the decisions that people make and the way that they perform and how effectively they perform in those environments. To get there, we've gone through a lot of events as humans that have fundamentally changed how we perform. My work has actually touched on some of those things. Significant game-changing events. Now, does anyone recognise the picture up there in the top? Oh, silly me, I forgot to ask. I have to check. Is there any other IEEE members here? I need to know. Thank you. Duty complete. Now we can go back to talking. Okay, game-changing events. Kubrick actually grasped a really, really great concept. And it's actually an interesting philosophical discussion. Are we as humans evolving from something, or are we evolving to something? Kubrick actually suggested that actually our evolution is out into the stars and that we're actually evolving to something rather than from something. That is a really good example of some points I'll make later on. Okay, some other game-changing events. Hand axe. Changed the way that we actually operated in the landscape. Let me just go back to Kubrick's point just for a moment. Do you remember those who know 2001, like I do, beginning to end, and could probably recite most of the musical score at the same time? There were two things that the apes did, that the primate did with the knowledge they had. The first one is the one shown there, where they actually learned to kill animals and suddenly could gain control of their food supply. Do you remember what the second significant event was?
Kill each other.
Sorry?
Kill each other.
Kill each other, that's right. So suddenly they did, by killing each other, seize control of the constrained resource in their landscape, which was water. It was a game-changing event. Really great encapsulation of that concept. Now, the other point to make about it is that, and I'll come back to this in a little while, we as humans take technology and we apply a process to the use of that technology. Sometimes we take the same technology or tool and we simply apply a new process. We had gone from using it to kill animals to using it to kill each other. Change of process. So you know what the next one is? It's a sickle. It's a very early stone sickle from an early human community in the Middle East. Obviously, one of the most significant game-changing events that's happened in the last several hundred years has been the invention of the printing press. Sorry? Thank you. It was a significant game-changing event. Why? Because suddenly we could spread knowledge in a way that we could only ever envisage and hope for prior to the inventing of the printing press itself. The Watt steam engine, another one. And then obviously associated closely with the Watt steam engine was the loom. And actually the ability to industrialise the production of fabric, etc. We kicked off the Industrial Revolution.
And the Luddite Revolution.
And well, yes, and in fact there's some fascinating stories that come out of the UK about the attempts to create Luddite-based communities and so on as a direct response to the poor living conditions that people had.
The Amish.
Amish. Has anyone actually ever been over there to Pennsylvania and seen an Amish community? What do you think?
I couldn't imagine myself.
No. I, in a previous life, tried to go away and actually hide from technology for a little while. Has anyone had that experience? Can't get to your mobile, you can't get to your PC. How'd you feel?
Good.
You enjoyed it, did you? I hated it. I actually couldn't deal with it. You know, I got caught by my then wife and my secretary. My secretary was on the other end of the communications yelling at me, and my wife was at this end because I found an internet cafe. Anyway, we, all of us, technology is an extension of our existence, and that's what we do as humans. All of these game-changing events, these tools, have simply been an extension of our human capability. Anyone know who that gentleman is?
CRSA Model 1, 16 carriage, 32K expansion set.
Does that say something about the people in this room? Charles Darwin. I inserted Charles Darwin here because he's been a significant game-changing event that we in the Western world are still struggling to deal with. We were talking before about the United States, and if anyone spent any significant time in the US, you know that Christian fundamentalism is a really deep part of their life. I worked down in Florida, and it's a little different. I always had envisaged Florida as this really modern holiday state in the US, but in fact, it's probably some of the most conservative parts of the United States. There were 6 Bible channels into my hotel room. You know, I could choose which minister out of 6 I wanted to give money to first thing every morning. Another significant game-changing event, that's the launch of Gagarin. Okay, that's Soyuz 1. They were all events that have had a deep impact on us as humans and in the way that we perform, the things that we do. What characterises these game-changing events? Thomas Kuhn. Anyone familiar with Kuhn's work? Yeah. One of the most abused terms, I feel like hitting marketing people and corporate executives when they stand up and say, this sales principle will be a fundamental paradigm shift in the marketplace. Actually, no, it won't. Because what Thomas Kuhn was talking about when he talked about a paradigm shift was blood on the carpets. The scientific community, one part bitterly defending their point of view while something was coming through the door that was going to change how they operated. Kuhnian paradigm shifts are actually blood on the carpet stuff. They are not that we're going to change how something operates in this little minuscule part of the marketplace. Personal hate of mine. One of the most important things about these things, though, is that game-changing events are socio-technical in nature. So fascinating work was done on this thing called socio-technical systems and how they operate. Some of the leading work actually came out of the 1950s in the coal industry in the United Kingdom, out of the place called the Tavistock Institute in the UK. Now, I'm not sure if anyone here has actually encountered their work. If you haven't, as technologists, it's actually really worth going back and having a look at what they did and the things that they determined. A new form of longwall mining that they analysed actually changed the social structures within the communities. And they were trying to understand why the productivity was so much higher. And it was actually about how the teams operated in a competitive fashion within shifts that actually significantly enhanced the output of the coal mines. Now, what's also interesting about that socio-technical study is what happened downstream. Their work was shut down by the unions, by the trade unions in the United Kingdom, because they were actually showing how teams within mines could operate in a far more efficient and effective manner. And the trade unions saw it as an attack on the workplace and on the rights of the individual, etc., etc. In fact, this work done by Tavistock showed that the workers were actually really enjoying their work more because there was a sense of competition in what they were doing. So, you know, that socio-technical work shaped a lot of thinking about how, in particular in mainstream Europe, we might look at these major technological changes. The second thing, important point to make is that game-changing events, those who embrace them early always achieve dominance in the environment. Go back to Kubrick's view again. The primate who took the weapon and seized control in the landscape had the winning capability, the ability to control a constrained resource. Probably the last point to make is this one here about the fact that when we have these game-changing events, learning is accelerated quite significantly. If we were to think about a continuum of human knowledge development, these game-changing events tend to rapidly expand the rate at which we gain new knowledge and the volume of new knowledge that's created. So if we were to look downstream to the singularity, what we'd of course be seeing is that significant turning point that says we're off in a way that is never have been achieved before. So, game-changing events. This is probably the most defining characteristic about them. They are technological, they are scientific in nature, but their impact touches almost all aspects of human existence. Now, in Western society, can you point to anything now about our society that hasn't been touched by the game-changing event of the computer chip? Sorry? The RSL? No, they've got a website, sorry. So, over the last few years, what I've been trying to understand in my own work is how we deal with these changes. My work came out of a field called enterprise architecture. Has anyone had much to do with EA as a discipline? Okay, probably worth taking a brief aside then and talking about what EA is about. Okay, enterprise architect's responsibility these days is to actually work with organisations to express the vision of the organisation and to link it back to the capability of development of the organisation. Architects talk about people, process and technology. Now I should make the other point, enterprise architecture, as usual in the IT industry, what have we done? We've stolen someone else's discipline name and we've said, we're now architects. But we haven't really understood what the implications of it were. My own work, I actually spent some time in Europe and I actually went and had a look at what does it mean to be an architect. And the ultimate example that you see in European communities is in the cathedrals and so on. It was an expression of the aspiration of the community translated into technology, i.e. stonemasonry. And some great examples of the things that came out of it were things like the flying buttress, where we had a technological problem, but we had an aspiration. And what did we do as humans? We solved it. We got it scum. In the IT industry, we use this term architecture without actually understanding that what we're really doing and trying to do is express the aspirations of the organisation. That's my 30-second thing on what enterprise architecture is about. I have some very strong views myself on a number of the individuals that call themselves enterprise architects, but actually just put technical solutions together. That's not what being an architect is about. But out of this field called enterprise architecture, I started to look at and remembering that my work was with emergency services agencies in particular. We give them this technology, but we then encapsulate them in an environment where they've got to make decisions. So how do we create a holistic environment that actually enables them to effectively use the technology to make decisions in disasters? Now, look around Australia in the last few years and some of the bushfires that we've had. One of the things that plays out in those things is actually poorly designed environments for human information interchange. If we look back a little further, the Vincennes disaster that happened in the Gulf. Anyone familiar with Vincennes? Here, the Vincennes tragedy. Rich decision-making had to take place. There's a set of individuals in those operational centres that are all playing together to actually determine a potential course of action. In the Vincennes, they made a series of decisions, but also failed to communicate effectively. As a consequence, an Iranian passenger liner was shot down during the period of the Gulf blockade. That was all about bad design all the way out from the computer interface to the actual facility design and where they were making their decisions. So on the basis of that work, what I started to look at increasingly was the fact that, in fact, architecture is about a couple of additional things. First of all, it's about environment. This actual environment here is a source of stresses, it's a source of opportunity. If you're talking about modern business and you want to talk about expressing the aspiration of business, the organisation responds to the stresses, changing tax law, for example, in various ways, offshoring their money. And so what does the tax office do in response to that? Well, they're spending vast amounts of information, funds on intelligence systems to track where we're all trying to hide our money now. So they've actually had a similar response to the changing environment. It is also a place where we're trying to seek to shape outcomes. And the other critical thing is what sits right through the centre of this model. And that is that information is the means of skill transfer and it is the primary transformation mechanism. So what I realised in looking at that was, in fact, what we have is the story of the human journey. People apply process to the use of technology to shape or respond to the environment. That, in fact, has been the basis of the human enterprise and its journey since our earliest times. And from that, we can actually then begin to think about, well, if we understand that that's the basis of what we're trying to do as humans, where's this human enterprise going? So we talk about an event like singularity and we say, what's the aspiration of the human species in terms of singularity? Well, let's understand what we want to do with that technology. What outcomes do we want to shape? What stresses are we responding to? So it's a paradigm for how the human enterprise actually operates itself. I already made this point, and I think I'll just hop on and say, so this is how I evolved the model over the last 18 months. As I said, people and processes are applied to solve specific problems. The central thing to the whole thing is this thing called information. And one of the things that we have most achieved in our human journey is the ability to more quickly transmit vast amounts of information. As technologists, though, I think that is also the opportunity for things that we need to be thinking about. How do you enable people to filter and deal with vast amounts of information very quickly and to make decisions? One of the things that defines the game-changing events of the last 20 years is the rate of information that's thrown at us. Back in the 80s, I was a stockbroker. I was there on the trading floor in October 1987. That was a memorable day for me. But the amount of information that we had to deal with then, as young 20-something bucks working in the stockbroking industry, was nothing compared to the volume of information they have to deal with now when they're working in that. Likewise, when they're doing significant decision-making in terms of disasters and so on, there's huge amounts of information coming in. As technologists, we need to be thinking about how we're going to help people deal with that information so that they can actually make more effective decisions. There's a point at which, in your learning and your training, that people operating in those environments operate from tacit knowledge. You know, that stuff that you can't articulate that you know, but you know. So what we're doing as technologists is we're actually going to try and help people to more and more deal with that. Now, one of the things I think about singularity is it may help us to find ways to more effectively tap on that tacit knowledge and then be able to apply the use of that knowledge in training others. Because the hardest thing in tacit knowledge is actually to try and get people to articulate it so you can then teach others. Let me just give a really good example. There was some work done several years ago because there was a fire in a major warehouse in the UK. Thankfully, the firemen that were operating there were all operating with cameras on their heads, because the incident controller who was actually in with the team saw a series of cues. He couldn't articulate what those cues were, but he called his team and got them out. And just as they got out of the building, there was a massive backdraft. Now, the team would have been lost completely if he had responded. He was responding from a set of cues that were deeply embedded down in his unconscious self. And the events that he saw triggered a series of decisions down there in that unconscious surface as, get the hell out of here. Now, it wasn't until they actually replayed all the video, and it's a fascinating study for anyone that'd like to have a look at it. They replayed all those segments of video that came from the cameras and everything, and there were tiny little cues that the backdraft was about to happen. Now, we talk about, in terms of the human enterprise, responding to things that are happening in the environment. There have been a set of little clues there and cues that some of our decisions have not been very good along the way, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. Fascinatingly, and we were talking before lunch about political imperatives and so on, that the political imperatives and those who seem to own the corporational outcomes and so on don't want to acknowledge those things. They don't want to respond to those cues. Yeah, as a collective, I don't think as a collective in society that you could doubt that the weight of view is on the fact that people, we're screwing this up really badly, we've got to do something about it before it becomes irretrievable. As I said, I'm confident that we have the ability to solve it. We just have to make a decision that it has to be solved. So, we have a set of cues. Down there in the environment, there are three sorts of environment I talk about in my work. Number one, the natural environment. Secondly, the built environment. Now, within that can be the entire continuum of the things that we have built as humans to enhance our ability to live. And thirdly, cultural. I mentioned before the southern part of the United States, like them or love them, we have to learn to deal with them. And we have to find a way to help them adapt their thinking that some event is not going to suddenly set it all right for them again. As I talked about before, the environment is a source of things where we're trying to shape outcomes, but we also inherit particular things. Up there on the top left quadrant, we have two things about people. We have the individuals and we have teams. Teams can be any construct from 2 to hundreds. The needs and the aspirations of those people provide the why for anything that we do. Over on the right-hand quadrant, the set of processes that provide the methods for us to actually deal with the forces that are coming from the environment or to shape outcomes in the environment. And then we have a set of tools that provide us the capabilities to deal with those things. And then, of course, information provides the how. Now, I guess one of the things interesting about this that I was thinking about when I was looking at it again this morning is if you think about the size of that information piece in the centre there, if you think about the evolution of human capability, it's the enlargement of that that's actually enhanced our ability to develop new tools and technologies and to change processes and use technologies and tools in more effective ways. Okay. This is the tool, the model in all its complexity. What I've tried to do is use it to actually say, in the human enterprise, there's these things that constitute individuals that are important. Self-actualisation, that's a Western concept, but it's a very important one that actually drives how we make decisions. Situational awareness, worldviews, tacit knowledge, all those things. Down at the team level, shared goals and aspirations. Now, shared goals and aspirations. Anyone that's watched the Nuremberg Rally video, you want to see collective behaviour at its very, very best, and a man who knew how to manipulate the deep collective unconscious that sits underneath that. And I should say here, my personal belief as technologist is you need to actually better understand human psychology too as you take your journey. Because there are things that go on in that deep unconscious level that affect how we put in place technology now, but also how things like singularity are going to shape outcomes into the future. The rest of the model is something that's probably a bit beyond exploration today, because what I wanted to do is quickly just go to a couple of examples. But if anyone would like to explore this some more, I actually blog about this as part of my PhD. What I've tried to do in my own thesis is, rather than to close it up until I actually deliver my thesis, is to actually try and blog it out as I go and actually talk it out that way. My view is that, and I fully support this, my view is that closing down access to human knowledge is the very worst course of action that anyone can actually take if we want to develop as a species and deal with the issues we have. Hominid problem solving. What I wanted to do is show some examples of how we've done this as humans. That's Lucy. Like I said, she greets you as you walk in the front door of our home. Lucy actually is on the continuum, and you can see on the bottom graphic here, is anyone here into anthropology very much? Okay, great. I personally believe that anthropology actually holds the key for us as engineers and technologists to better understand how to design our technologies. So, take the time and understand it. You guys did a museum trip, I think, yesterday, didn't you? There's some fascinating examples in there of actually looking at human anthropology and the information that is encapsulated in the fossil record of hominid development. So, Lucy sits down here on the continuum. Fascinating. Hominid problem solving. Whilst the Australopithecus eventually died out, Homo developed out of it. And how did that happen? Well, it happened because we actually learned to solve a few problems. For anyone who knows anything about Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy was discovered in a part of Africa that underwent very, very significant and extreme climate shifts during the time that this particular group of hominids was in existence. They went from extreme rainfall event to extreme dry conditions. Yet, they were able to adapt the way that they lived to actually survive those climate change problems. They were actually able to evolve new forms of food sources. They were able to deal with living on an open savanna, and therefore you develop skills that have actually guided our future development. So, Lucy, great example of solving what problem? Climate change. Is there anything new about it? Not at all. The only difference is this time that we're the ones causing some of the problems. This is the other gentleman, early modern human, called Cro-Magnon man. Cro-Magnon man, the Aurignacian culture, discovered primarily in the south of France, but had a fairly large spread across Europe. They were the ones that developed the use of sharp blades that led to things like the sickle and so on, that actually became the basis for agricultural development. Cro-Magnon man also had rituals that actually demonstrated that they had some belief in the sanctity of the human life, etc. There are a lot of things about this group that are very, very interesting. They dealt with a really, really significant climate change event. There was a large ice age that rolled ice down across Europe and moved them, and it actually changed how their community developed. There's a fascinating community in the south of Europe that actually shows signs, and it's an Aurignacian culture, of movement of the community and changes in all sorts of practices that actually allowed them to survive this event called the Ice Age that rolled down across Europe. We have the capability to solve problems. Now, this last one here, this is my view and only my view. It's an instinctive view of what has happened over the last 10 years in the online community. And I think it's an example of how we solve problems without knowing that or deeply understanding the depth of the problem that exists. Information has always been transmitted from humans to humans. It's been a feature of our society since we formed the first city-states. Down the bottom of the triangle is a set of things that we actually use to transmit that information. Pictures and stories. I have a fascination with human myth and the way that we use myth to transmit information from generation to generation. As we evolved forms of writing, etc., then we started to share information in various other ways. And then we had this thing called the web suddenly start to appear. And we had this new method for actually sharing that static information. But all it was static information. What happened as a consequence of that? Well, if we look back to early industrial society, when we started to spread out across communities, the transmission of information became completely technical in nature. What has happened over the last 100 years, 50 years, is that we have now started using our global environment to transfer values. So, associated with some knowledge that I have, I need to tell you a little bit about who I am and the way I see the world. It is my view that that third layer there, the wikis, etc., you could have predicted if you'd sat down and thought about it, that as humans we would have come up with a way to actually transmit our values globally. And that through that then, if I transmit some information with my values, then you can better understand how I see the world, and then you can better take the things that I've done. Now, the top two levels there, I'm doing some work in the US on trust development and how we in an online community develop trust. I think it's the next generation is to actually understand how we share that understanding in a better form. And then finally, we can actually enable global knowledge sharing in a more effective manner. Finally, I guess my point is to say singularity, whilst it's significant in its impact for human development, that the issues that it will raise, we have the capability to evolve the thinking to solve those issues as we go along. We have the capacity to deal with it. We have clearly demonstrated that over thousands and thousands of years of development. We're a pretty cool species at solving problems. That's basically the points I wanted to make today. Any questions?
And you have URLs as well?
Sure can. There are actually two. I run because I have my own company, I own a company called EcoThought. So that's ecothought.com.au. And then I also have a Google blog. Slade PB is my online.
How do you spell that?
SLADEPB.
Just to note, all slides or links will be available via the website.
Right, so I'll actually put up some stuff.
So you don't need to ask those questions.
Isn't there something of a scaling problem here? Obviously, Australopithecus haven't over many years to solve these issues, but maybe have tens of thousands. We might have a few dozen or even some decades to solve the singularity issues. And perhaps, I guess, what I might propose is that while the whole species under pressure of evolution is a very sort of crude and long-term thing, was able to deal with previous climate change, previous catastrophic episodes, we're going to have to deal with it in a much more rarefied and sort of individual rather than in a species kind of way.
Look, I concur with your thoughts there. I think, though, let's just realise that we had, 160,000 years out there on the savannah. We've had effectively 6,000 years in city-state communities. And have a look at where our knowledge has come. And look, to be quite honest, it was a slow snail crawl until the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And then we have one of those significant events that actually significantly we took off in terms of knowledge development. I think someone before lunch made the point that we only use 10% of our capacity. I think there is actually a huge piece of work to be done there to actually understand how we more effectively use the rest of that capacity that we have. I think that we do have the capacity to deal with it. You're right, it is the time frame that is of concern. But I guess, think about the fact that Cro-Magnon man was actually modern human. Anything that we do today, or any knowledge that we had, he actually had the ability to learn. He just didn't have the foundations that we build on from our earliest infant life to actually build the complexity of knowledge that we have. So, I guess there's a risk there that I could be wrong, but I believe we have the capacity to actually deal with those. And let's just also acknowledge the fact that the web is how old? 10 years, 12 years? Yeah, the DARPA one. That's true for DARPA, but I guess I'm talking about the more global embracing of the web. Yeah, the World Wide Web. Yep. So, actually, not that long. Yeah, in fact, on TED, there's a really, really great talk that just came out of one of the recent TEDs where he talks about the global brain and draws the analogy that there is effectively the same level of network connections and so on as matches roughly the human brain and synapses and so on. That is a sign, there's some guide there that we have this capability to externalise things and then link it back to our own knowledge development. I think that's where the hint is, but we need to understand much more about this complex piece of soft matter that's going on up here. And that's where I think, as technologists, one of our most important pieces of work is to actually understand how this works so that we can actually come back and use it more effectively.
Technology is not the only game changer, however.
No, beliefs are too.
And I think you might want to, looking at that enterprise model was very technology based. It was about the people using processes with technology to deal with problems. Surely other game changers would have been such as the introduction of universal suffrage, the abolition of slavery.
That's why I had Darwin up there, because I think Darwin was a game-changing event. I agree with you. There are a whole pile of other ones there that are significant game-changing events in the human journey. I guess one of the things, though, that differentiates technology-based game-changing events from these other things, like Darwin and suffrage and so on, is the depth of the human response that comes out of the collective against some of those belief things that seem to target people's individual worldviews. And probably one of the most significant things that I think is going to happen over the next 2 generations is the evolution of that worldview to actually for people to see themselves as a part of a global collective that actually has a set of shared global values and so on. And that's where human myths and stories and all the rest of it come into it. And there's a whole different piece of work to explore there. Yeah.
You spoke about the progress of human evolution in responding to climate change and how the environment and anthropology. This is not so much a question, but just something to with folks here. There's 2 wonderful BBC DVDs. The first one's The Human Journey, looks at the migration from Lucy across to Europe and all the rest of it. And the other marvellous one is a book from I found impossible to read. It's wonderful documentary on DVD. It's Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs and Steel. All of them talk about mankind's response to the climate and maybe we're going to respond again to the new climate.
Diamond also has another piece of work that came out about 18 months ago. I just, from the life of me, I can't remember what it's called.
Collapse.
Sorry?
Collapse.
Collapse. Yeah. Highly recommend it. Although I don't agree with some of the bows he draws on the Easter Island story, but, another great piece of work.
I am, generally speaking, an optimist. I believe in humanity, I believe in life, I believe in our ability to do things. And I've always managed to find the downside of any argument anyone comes with. And let's not forget, when you're talking about how we can, the game changing and how we can deal with it. We have one thing which is our generation, or our couple of generations. We have atomic weapons. The Luddites have atomic weapons.
We are like, as a generation, we are like those teenage boys who take their high-speed MRXs or whatever they're called and wraps them around trees at 180 kilometres an hour and splits them in half. As a generation, we are like those teenage boys. We are deep in technological adolescence right now. Whether we choose to survive it as a species is an interesting question. It is probably the single thing that would allow us to, fail in our attempt to achieve this future for ourselves.
Yeah, you mentioned you're an optimist and you said you've always muddled through, but just getting back to Jared Diamond's book, not every society has muddled through. There have been lots of societies that have destroyed their environment and collapsed. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is what you talk about with enterprise architecture. It's often enterprise architecture. It's very easy to come up with a good enterprise architecture. It's a lot harder to get it implemented because of all the interests and short-termism, etc. So I sort of somewhat question your optimism on those two dimensions.
So firstly, natural evolution, natural selection, guess what? It goes right through us as a species. Entire societies take actions that effectively take them out of the pool for the future. Personally, watching some of the acquaintances of my son, for example, my inclination is to hand him the towel and say, "You're out of the gene pool, son." The natural selection is deep, and it goes across all levels of human development. I think that Europe shows us the example of the collapse of the structures that drove that society for such a long time. That entire feudal, small country-based environment. Same way other societies collapse. Easter Island is probably a really good example of one. Probably on enterprise architecture, I concur that part of the role of the architect is actually to work with the leaders of the organisation to actually help them evolve their thinking as well. Being an architect is actually taking people on a journey. If you look at the lessons of the great cathedrals in Europe and the architects there, they took those communities on a journey.
One problem is with a very powerful nation, I did not mention its name, its Luddite paranoia might bring us all there.
Correct, but I believe that the influence of that is actually in a fairly rapid state of collapse now. Anyone who has read Tacitus and then takes a journey through that nation, Tacitus, the downfall of the Roman Empire, go and drive around in that particular country after you have read Tacitus. The signs are there that it's dead, it just hasn't laid down yet. Any other questions? I think this young man's about to cut me off anyway.
No, just to say one or two more if there's any party. Okay, no, that looks like it.
So I hope that was of interest. I believe that singularity is an event that is inevitable, and I think that we have the capacity to deal with the issues along the way, provided we survive this technological adolescence that we're in right now.